Weather University, sponsored by Gaston Roofing.
Welcome into Pinpoint Weather University. I'm meteorologist Brandon Lawson here on Queen City News Plus, alongside Chief Meteorologist Helene and meteorologist Andrew Brightman. This is kind of a more somber episode, guys. This week does mark 1 year since historic Hurricane Helene really devastated our friends over the Western Carolinas. It's hard to believe it's already been a year, and many people over there are still picking up the pieces.
Yeah, and I still remember, just like yesterday, Brandon, you and I coming into the station, we knew what the western part of the state, even here in Charlotte, was facing with this storm. But as all those flash flood emergencies start to hit, you see the devastation. It really is something that even in your worst dreams, you almost didn't expect here with how bad it got with this storm. We knew a flood of historical nature was coming from Helene, but some of the images you really just had to see to believe from this storm once it moved through.
Of course, what made it so much worse were the days of rain leading up to actual Helene and that tropical storm actually coming through and toward our area in the western part of the state. So, I mean, there was already flooding happening. There was severe weather happening and some wind damage and spin up tornadoes, too, even before Helene actually came through. So just made the situation so much worse and just led to all that devastation across the region.
Yeah, we know how active it was for us in the Pinpoint Weather Center, but it was even more active for our friends at the National Weather Service. We have 3 National Weather Service offices that rely on Greenville, Spartanburg, Raleigh, and up in Plattsburgh. And the Greenville Spartanburg National Weather Service office had to issue 16 of those catastrophic flash flood warnings, the flash flood emergencies. And luckily, we have a special guest on the show with us today, Trisha Palmer, meteorologist in charge there in the Greenville Spartanburg National Weather Service office. You've probably seen Trisha on our screens before. Trisha, you've chatted with us on numerous occasions in regards to talking about not only Helene, but things before Helene when it comes down to preparing emergency kits or just talking about different kinds of alerts you guys are going to be issuing at the National Weather Service. So thanks so much for taking the time and coming on the show with us today.
I'm so happy to be here.
Trisha, let's start out with your official role at the National Weather Service office in Greenville, Spartanburg, South Carolina, warning coordination meteorologist. Exactly what does that involve?
So the warning coordination meteorologist is the liaison with external customers, and there's one at every office, and we are in charge of outreach and preparedness. We oversee what we call the Decision Support Services program, so we make sure that when we are providing the decision support to our partners in state and local government, emergency management, and even you guys here in the media, it is our job to make sure that those are the highest quality possible. But really, it just comes down to the liaison between the emergency management and media.
Now, let's go back to the very beginning here. Late September 2024, we're seeing the stalled front. We're seeing Helene forming. What is happening in your office? All the activity going on, what was it like in those days leading up to all of this heavy rain and wind coming in?
Well, the first time we mentioned something in what we call our area forecast discussion was the Saturday before Helene, where we started talking about the potential for something developing in the Gulf, and we weren't sure about the impacts to Western North Carolina. As we moved into Monday, and we had what we call potential tropical cyclone 9. This is like Andrew had said, Brandon had said, it was before it was even a storm, but it was already forecast to become a major hurricane. And we knew that we were in trouble as early as Monday. So we actually put out what we call a partner one-pager, just letting our partners know, hey, we're looking at the potential for heavy rain, for strong winds. And as we moved forward in time, our wording just got worse and worse. For example, we first used the word catastrophic on Tuesday afternoon, and we kept ramping it up as the rainfall predictions kept going up, as the river forecast predictions kept getting higher and higher, especially once we were starting to getting into major and then even record stages. Mm-hmm. It was somber. It was chaotic, but somber, if that makes sense, because we knew that this was going to be devastating. We actually said in our Tuesday live webinar that we did for our partners that this was going to be one for the record books. And we were getting more and more concerned as we got into Tuesday and especially Thursday, the day before the main impacts. I mean, we were making phone calls to our emergency management partners. We were doing everything we could to try to get the word out. And we know that with we have over 5.5 million residents that we serve in our 46 counties. We know that we can't reach everybody, so we use you guys here in the media. We use our emergency managers as force multipliers to try to help get the word out. It's one weather enterprise, and we were all in lockstep with you guys helping us to reach the public as well.
And thinking back to leading up to that storm, I mean, the track was likely bringing the center of circulation very close to where your weather forecast office is. What kind of preparations were you making to make sure everyone that has to work at the weather forecast office safe? And what was kind of the preparations you guys were making at the office while you're also going to be trying to get at this life-saving information and warnings as well?
For us, it was just the standard, let's just make sure that our gas tanks are fueled up. Let's make sure that we have extra food in the office for the folks that have to work long hours, because we were working 12, if not longer shifts. Our hydrologist was basically there for 3 days straight. We just had to make sure that the people who had to be there were taken care of. As with most people, that Friday morning time period was the worst. So we had to make some adjustments with the time that we worked. Our day shift usually comes in at 7 o'clock in the morning. We couldn't have people out on the road between 6:30 and 7:30. We couldn't let our midnight shift go home at 7:30. And so we delayed all of that so that our day shift would come in later. And it turns out some of our midnight shift couldn't even get home. So they came back to the office and tried to get some sleep in. So we brought in sleeping bags. We brought in cots. We've got a stove and an oven. And then after folks lost power, they would bring in their extra food and cook it there at the office, because there was nothing that, they didn't want to lose it. So they just cooked it there.
I was curious too, leading up to the storm, talking about all the forecasting for it. We knew flooding was going to be a big concern with the storm later in the week, but you guys were also dealing with active weather ahead of that. Actually, I pulled up some of the severe thunderstorm warnings and tornado warnings you guys issued ahead of that. How hard was that to forecast, the severe weather that was happening early in the week, and also trying to forecast what was going to happen later in the week in regards to the flooding?
Well, part of the weather service, just with you guys, we're here and we're always watching the weather. And with us, we're there 24/7 with at least 2 meteorologists on duty all the time. So we knew that when it came to this predecessor rainfall event, we knew that there was going to be weather ahead of Helene in and of itself. So as we were watching these storms develop Wednesday and even Thursday, we were issuing, like you said, tornado warnings. We had several flash flood warnings, and we can talk about the flash flood warnings separately in a minute. But it's just, we had to have somebody watching that. We didn't know how bad it was going to be. We didn't know how bad the tornado threat during Helene itself was going to be leading up to it. So we had to have an extra person there just to monitor the tornado threat during the storm itself. But ahead of the storm, there's the chaos of trying to get the forecast out, trying to get the word out about how bad Helene was going to get. And then you have, okay, well, here's this random tornado warning, and we've got some trees down. And then afterwards, there's no way to distinguish these trees down from that tiny tornado from the overall devastation of Helene. So it was really chaotic. It was difficult, because in the grand scheme of things, this little maybe EF0, possibly EF1 tornado that may have occurred on Wednesday versus everything that happened with Helene.
80 mile per hour.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
How do you put all of that in perspective? It's just one little, maybe half-mile long tornado track, and there's trees down everywhere around it too. So just keeping it all in perspective.
We got to get just a quick break in, but after the break, we want to talk about the flooding aspect of this. That is what most people remember from Helene, just the devastating impacts that the just power of water has done to our Western Carolina. So I want to talk about just what led up to the flooding, and also how you guys knew the issue, all the flash flood emergencies that you guys had to issue that morning. So we'll talk about that coming up on the other side of the break here on Pinpoint Weather University on Queen City News Plus. Welcome back into Pinpoint Weather University here on Queen City News Plus. This week again marks 1 year since Hurricane Helene. It's hard to believe it's already been a year, but the impacts there are still being seen across the Western Carolinas. The landscape there still changed in many locations. Many people still trying to pick up the pieces and just trying to rebuild there and trying to rebuild some sort of aspect of what was. and for our friends in the Western Carolinas. We've got Chief Meteorologist Helene with us today, Meteorologist Andrew Brightman, and also our special guest is Trisha Palmer. She is the Warning and Coordination Meteorologist there at the Greenville-Spartanburg National Weather Service office. Trisha, we were just talking before the break about some of the warnings you guys had to issue. Obviously, that was pretty active. And Andrew, we were just talking during the break about some of the flooding that led up to Helene even getting here.
Yeah, that's one thing we want to get into here, Tricia, is the pre-event that we talked about so much, that the devastation with the flooding truly would not have been possible without that pre-event that we saw a couple of days before. Could you talk about basically what the National Weather Service was seeing that would lead to a pre-event that was so intense like what we saw? And did it make basically the Weather Forecast Office even more concerned when Helene was actually going to move through just about 36 hours later?
Sure, absolutely. Anytime you have something that sets up a heavy rainfall event ahead of another heavy rainfall event that primes the soils, we call that the antecedent soil moisture conditions. When you have these double events, one right after another, whether it's like you go all the way back to 1916, which was the former storm of record. That was 2 tropical storms, one right after another. Or you have something very localized, like when we had Fred back in 2021. We actually had a predecessor rainfall event during that one as well. But during Helene, we knew that we had this fire hose of moisture, all the moisture being sort of sucked up and tunneled up from Helene towards the southern Appalachians there was an upper level system and a bit of a cold front coming down, without getting into all the geeky meteorological details. So we had all this moisture coming up into the southern Appalachians, and it was just really targeting the southern Appalachians, right? So, and what we have is when we have moisture rising, it's forced to condense. So we're used to this, especially along the Blue Ridge Escarpment. As it condenses, the rain falls, and so we're often this is why this area is called a temperate rainforest, because we have so much rain in the area. And when we get the southeast flow or easterly flow or southerly flow, it's forced to rise, it falls, and we can have devastating consequences. So you have something like that ahead of something like Helene, and there's just no words to describe what ends up happening. So what we ended up with was probably a good third of the rain was with the predecessor rainfall event, and that pulled all the rivers at least into minor flood stage. And then Helene came, and what we call the base flow was already very high. The soils were already saturated. There was nowhere for the rain to go. So it just fell on the mountains, fell on the rivers, fell in the valleys, and it ran straight off and couldn't be soaked up anymore. It ended up being, again, a truly devastating event.
Can you talk more about some of those flash flood warnings that you guys had to issue that day, or not just the day of Helene, but ahead of time too? I mean, I felt like every day that week leading up to the storm, we had flash flood warnings, but then the morning of Helene, we had you guys call flash flood emergencies. Can you just talk about the difference between the flash flood warnings leading up to Helene and also the flash flood emergencies the morning of?
Sure. Well, just to be clear, I want to talk about the 3 levels of warnings that we issue. So we've always been able to issue what we call flash flood warnings. And since 2014, we've been able to headline our warnings with a flash flood emergency headline if necessary. In 2020, we split up our warnings into 3 different levels. So we have the lowest level, we call that the base level. And then we have the middle level, which is called considerable. And then the top level is called catastrophic, which is your flash flood emergency. So that base level, if you compare it to your rivers and streams, that's sort of like minor flooding. So this is more common flooding of low-lying areas. It can still be a significant issue if maybe the stream is over the road. You move up to the second level, and that is your considerable flash flood warning. That's when your phone is going to go off when we issue those warnings, your wireless emergency alert. So you're going to get alerted on that on your phone. And so if you compare that to a river stage, that's more like moderate flood stage. That's when we're expecting a widespread emergency response, property impacts, maybe structural impacts to homes. This is a serious situation, a life-threatening situation. And then the top level, that catastrophic, the flash flood emergency. This is a very rare situation. compare it to major flood stage, a widespread emergency response. This is when we tell people do not get on the roads unless you're fleeing the floodwaters. Before Helene, in the 10 years before Helene, since we had been able to use that headline, we'd only issued 10 of these. People might be able to remember some of them, like in 2018 with the Lake Tahoma issue, back during Fred in 2021. But during Helene, we issued 16. If you count all the updates that we issued, all the separate wireless emergency alerts that go out from when we either extend it in time or update the time or whatever, there were a lot of alerts that went on folks' phones. So leading up to the event, during the predecessor rainfall event, we just knew that these flash flood situations, that was, again, just going to prime the soils. And we were hearing from emergency managers that they were doing water rescues Wednesday and even into Thursday night, which for some of our counties, that really got people's attention. There's some of the folks were saying, well, okay, if it's this bad now, how bad is it going to be during Helene? Right. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pay attention to this, and I'm going to go ahead and evacuate because the emergency managers are telling us to. So in some areas, having the flash flooding ahead of Helene was, I hate to use the word fortuitous, but there was an advantage in some areas because it got the attention that, hey, this is going to be a very, very, very serious situation.
And that's the thing. I mean, what we're talking about here, it's all about communication, getting the word out and just kind of communicating how bad something like this could be. Most people never seen anything like this magnitude before in their lives. They've heard flash flood warnings before and things like that. Oh, there's a little bit of flooding outside, but it's all about communication, right? I mean, it's something that has been researched for decades now. What is the best way to get the word out and to just express to people this could be a life-changing situation? And, you know, you guys were using wording like catastrophic, life-threatening, things that you rarely use coming out of the National Weather Service. Yeah.
Right, absolutely. It was, we don't use words like that very often on purpose because we want people to take it seriously when it actually happens. And again, using you guys in the media, using our emergency management partners as force multipliers to try to get the wording out. We sent out a social media post on Thursday afternoon. We call it our urgent message post, where we basically said this is going to be one of the most significant events in modern history. It's going to be a once-in-a-lifetime event. Please heed the warnings, heed evacuation notices. We plead with you. We actually use those words. We plead with you to take this seriously. And we got feedback on it, people saying that they saw it and, you know, people from out of the area, and then they called family in the mountains, and then they read those words to their family members. Oh, okay, I'll go ahead and leave now. This sounds really scary, because here in the National Weather Service, and then you guys in TV media, we don't tend to hype these things up. But once we start saying words like that, we mean it. We wanted people to take it very, very, very seriously.
So Helene happens. The days of rain leading up to Helene, that happened. Helene comes through. We have all this devastating flooding. Now it's time for you and your teams, Tricia, to go out and conduct the surveys just to see, you know, just how high did the wind get, just what the flooding looks like, and talk to some of these people out there. It had to be such an emotional time. What were some things that really stick out in your mind? Anything that surprised you or your teams just about people out there and everything that they went through?
It was, there's not a lot of words.
Yeah.
When somebody goes through an event, it doesn't really matter to that one individual person. Is it Helene or is it a small tornado? If your house is destroyed, it's your house. It's a devastating event for you. But for us in the weather enterprise to see something so widespread and such devastation, I mean, there were problems with infrastructure. So there were places that you just couldn't get to. So a lot of, for example, our high watermark surveys on the hydro side, we limited a lot of that to the upstate until the infrastructure improved. And then we relied on our partners in the USGS, the Corps of Engineers, and they did a lot of surveys like that. We had to rely on crowdsourcing social media information. But when we did start getting out and talking to the people, it was amazing, the resilience. I remember one person, I was out with an emergency manager, and there was one person who the emergency manager asked this person, did you have any flooding? Did you have any impacts? And he said, oh yeah, but it was just my basement. It's fine. And the emergency manager said, no, contact us. We can help you with FEMA and get the reimbursement. And the person said, no, I got my neighbors, I got my family, I've got my church. I'll be fine. You concentrate on the people with more impacts. And this person had their basement flooded, so they still had impacts. But there were so many stories like that. And then talking to fire chiefs and other first responders who still went out, they went out ahead of the storm and they knocked on doors. And then there were some heroic stories of first responders. There was one that lost his home and he was injured and his wife was injured. And he still showed up the next day to go to work because he was saying, well, what else am I going to do? And I'm hearing these stories, and as a meteorologist safe in my bunker, it's just heartbreaking to see what these people went through and to wonder how in the weather enterprise is there anything we could do? What could we do better? I mean, we did whatever we could, and a lot of the first responders knew, but what else could we do to tell people this is going to be the worst event ever?
Yeah, just it's very difficult, just situation when you're forecasting. We know it's going to be really bad, but how do we get everybody out of harm's way? So I mean, it's just devastating to think about. Even 365 days later, knowing that those impacts are still there and will still be there for a lifetime for many that lost loved ones, lost homes that they were in forever. So it's definitely just very difficult looking back and seeing that
response too.
Yeah.
I mean, just so much help that was coming in, just pallets full of water bottles, where it got to the point where they're saying, okay, we're good on water. Now we need blankets. The temperatures are getting colder and the needs changed throughout that time. But there was just so much help coming in too. We saw, helicopters flying over and dropping things and just trying to get people out of those isolated situations where they were stuck and they couldn't get. And like you said, I mean, the roads just washed out and they couldn't get anywhere.
Yeah, we're going to squeeze in just a quick break, and on the other side of the break, we'll talk about our main takeaways from Helene in just a bit. We'll be right back.
All right, welcome back, everyone, to Pinpoint Weather University. We've got most of the weather team here and a special guest, Tricia Palmer from the Greenville-Spartanburg Weather Forecast Office, just talking about almost a year later from Hurricane Helene. And as we start to look forward a little bit after this storm, just wanted to talk a little bit about, what this storm did with your relationships with emergency managers.
One of the quotes that I hear from emergency management is, don't exchange business cards at the emergency. So it's all about relationships. Part of my job, again, as I've mentioned earlier, I'm a liaison with external partners, is to go out and develop those relationships, to put a face to the National Weather Service. Now, a lot of our emergency managers know some of our forecasters. They know me especially. They know our hydrologist. They know other people as we go out and do presentations or do other events. But they need to have somebody that they trust. They need to have a set of people that they trust, so to speak. So ahead of Helene or any other major weather event, if it's enough that not only are they getting the high impact weather briefings or, whatever, but when we're picking up the phone and they hear it in our voice. So when I'm telling one of the emergency managers that it is, again, weather jargon, but this is going to be off the rating curve for the French Broad River, and we don't exactly know how high it's going to get. And then the silence on the other end, that is really telling, because that scares me to say it. They can hear it in my voice, and it scares them to hear it. So our hydrologist started making phone calls as early as Tuesday because this was mainly a water event. We have a guy that handles landslides in our office, and he started making phone calls with our landslide partners. I started calling emergency managers. And so between all of us, and individual forecasters were also talking to people as they called in and asked questions, but the relationship, they knew us, they had the trust already there. And so they were able to take our information and relay that to their folks. They put together Facebook posts and, again, that door knocking campaign to get people to evacuate. It made a huge difference. And then after the storm, following up with them. Are you guys okay? How are you guys doing? We're here for you. Let us know what we can do for you. Because the weather was beautiful, really quiet for most of October, but we were still supporting them. If there was a dry cold front that went through and the winds were picking up, everybody was worried about the trees and the wildfire situation. We're worried about that. So all of this support that we're providing to emergency managers, they trust us based on the years of experience that they have. It's kind of like folks who watch you guys on TV. You're in their living rooms every day, right? And so they have a level of trust with you because they see you every day. So it's the same with us in emergency management. And then going forward, it just underscores the importance of developing those relationships and we have internal communications that you guys are on, our emergency managers are all on, seeing those names, making sure that emergency managers and our forecasters are communicating as much as possible and putting faces to names as well.
And, being a year later, is there anything you guys change moving forward into this hurricane season that we're in, or you just kind of go with what we've had? How do you kind of adjust after a storm like this there at the office? There's
nothing big that has changed. The wheels of government turn very slowly. But there are things that we're watching. For example, we know that the river basins have changed. There haven't been any major flood events since Helene. There have been some decent ones, but we're watching closely how the rivers are responding to the water. We're seeing, flash flooding a little faster than what we expected. So are we going to have to recalibrate some of the models? But it's all changing as the counties are doing debris removal. So eventually we believe that it should go back to what our river models were used to, so to speak, before Helene. But it's just all of this constant communication, finding out what the counties are doing. Do we need to make any changes on an as-needed basis during an event? And then, if the worst were to happen again, how do we communicate that wind threat again? That was a big concern that folks had, not really understanding how bad the winds were going to be, and especially the wind gusts, because the definition of a tropical storm is based on sustained winds, not the gusts.
Trisha, thank you just so much for coming on the show with us today. I know I speak for Tara and Andrew as well. We love you guys there at Greenville Spartanburg. We're always, like you were mentioning, some of those internal communications that we have with you guys. We're always in there looking at what you guys have to input for upcoming, whether it's a hurricane or a cold front or a winter storm. You guys are always on it in communication, not only for us, but for the public as well. And making sure that everybody's aware of when dangerous weather or even nice weather is on the way to those communities. Because even during nice weather, I always see some of the jokes and things that you guys put out, just kind of talking about high pressure being in control in sunny conditions. So thanks for all you guys do there, and thanks for coming on the show with us today.
Thanks, Trisha.
Thanks, Trisha.
Thank you, guys.
That's going to do it for this edition of Pinpoint Weather University. Coming up next week, we'll have another show for you. But for right now, take care and take care of each other. Again, guys, 1 year since Helene, but we'll continue to rebuild those communities together there in the Western Carolinas. Take care.
Queen City News Plus. Just search Queen City News on your smart TV's app store.